Well, yeah.
All right, I think we're. All right, I think we're ready. Rick, we're all set? Okay. Okay.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a special meeting of the Historic Preservation Commission of Montclair. It is June 17th, 2019, and we've called this special meeting in order to discuss the proposed demolition ordinance and also to discuss, prior to that, the rewrite of the application certificate of appropriateness. This is being live streamed on Channel 34. This has been notification. This meeting has been in the two papers, the Montclair Times, the Star Ledger, and also posted here in the municipal building. Mr. Petto, could roll call, please?
Sure. Chair Bennett.
Here.
Mr. Hyman is excused this evening. Mr. Greenbaum.
Here.
Mr. Rooney.
Here.
Ms. Kane-Levy.
Here.
And Mr. Reimnitz is also excused this evening. Mr. Connolly.
Here.
And Mr. Karasik.
Okay, and I'd just like to point out that we do have a quorum, and we will proceed with an official meeting. First order of business is the approval of minutes from the May 30th, 2019 meeting. Does anyone have any comments or corrections to those minutes? No?
No. I'll move to approve as is.
Great. Second?
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Abstain.
You weren't
wasn't
here. Okay.
You know, there is one thing.
Uh-oh.
The attendance, were you there last week? Me? Yes.
Oh, no.
So,
It was
yeah.
Angela. Sorry.
It was Mr. N.
No, you were. You weren't at the last one.
Yes, so that needs
Thank
to be changed.
Yes,
Where
thank
is
you.
that?
Under the
He was
roll
there.
call.
Attendance.
Yeah, roll
He
call.
wasn't there. That's why this meeting is happening.
Oh, right. Oh, thank you for picking that up. Okay. So, Mr. Karasik was not there. Mr. Angelo was there. So that
Correct.
is a correction.
Mhm.
All right. So do we have to vote on these again? May I have a motion to accept?
Accepted.
No, you have to make the motion.
Move to accept with the change.
Second.
All in favor? Aye, with that
One
correction.
abstention.
And one abstention. Thank you. So, would the public like to make any comments? No.
Why don't you
Okay. So, moving on, committee reports. We have the application certificate of appropriateness that Grant should be in your packet. Graham sent it to everybody on the internet, and then you also have a hard copy today with you. Thank you, Graham. I see you put Montclair Code 34-138D. The one thing that I realized, and it's in light of the comments from the zoning board, all applications should include the following. So you have 15 copies of completed application, photographs showing the existing condition of the entire building facade, and close-up photographs showing details of the area of work. Didn't we, if there's a facade change, were we asking for buildings on either side?
Yeah, I think that's.
Is that in here?
That is on page 3.
Yes?
Yeah, it's under, at the bottom, facade alterations, restorations, or new construction. The third bullet point is photographs of the existing structure with detailed photos of the specific facade. And then if the proposed project is within any historic districts, applicants must include photographs of adjacent structures and the existing streetscape taken from across the street.
Okay, just as long as that's in there. I think that's,
Maybe that should be put in.
So this is codified in the ordinance, just a heads up. This is straight out of the ordinance. So any changes to this language, we'd have to go through ordinance change. Just-
Well, no, what I'm thinking is that maybe that should be incorporated on the actual application.
but no, it's
So
only,
this is
This
the
is a checklist.
application.
This
These two
is the
pages are now the
application.
full application.
Oh, okay, no, well, it says all applications should include the following.
Yeah, so that's what's required of any type of application. Then, starting on page 3, it lists the subtypes of applications, and then each subtype has this different set of requirements of what you're supposed to submit. So
So this-
signage and awning applications require different submissions from a window installation application, for example.
and they get the streetscape only if they're in a historic district. That's
But you
where
said,
required.
you said, let me be clear, you said streetscape, you said adjacent structures.
Yeah, because that's what it says here.
Right.
Well, it says adjacent structures and the existing streetscape taken from across the street.
But it's
Okay.
only within a historic district, an existing historic district.
What about an area of consideration for historic district?
Now, this application is
That's
only
what we're
applicable to
talking
our
about
landmark,
tonight.
our individual landmarks and our landmark districts.
Only landmarks in landmark districts?
So
Having
the Town
nothing-
Center Historic District, Upper Montclair, Watchung Plaza,
Right, the four that
Pine
exist.
Street, and then
What
any
if-
individual.
What about requiring, and this might be requiring new language in the ordinance, that the application must comply with all architectural renderings and elevations must be taken from a perspective of a 5'7" person at ground level, or that's something that would
That would
tie-
have to be changed by ordinance and added into whichever section that would be most applicable.
Think so?
Mhm.
I'm not sure.
Because,
I mean, it's not, if you have to have landscapes and elevations and stuff, you can put on the application form, just like, you know, when you
I
do
think some of that
building-
language is
when you
in-
do height, you
yeah.
always say, you know, halfway up
I
the
think if
hill
you-
and this and that.
I think if you read some of the existing requirements that are already here, some of that language is already getting there. So the last one under facade alterations and restorations is a complete set of working drawings for the proposed project. Proposed project is located in the historic district, must include a streetscape, color elevation, and color rendering showing the new development in context of the neighboring buildings, structures, and sites. Three-dimensional models are also optional but encouraged. So a lot of that is in here.
Right.
But if we wanted to evaluate and look at that, that might be something that another committee could
Well, what
take
My
a
point
look
was
at.
just that if you wanted to say that it's all streetscapes from a 6-foot height, you
Right.
can say that in here, that doesn't need an ordinance change.
well, that's my concern, is that we all know that elevations that are presented to us at various times in a variety of applications oftentimes have certain distortions by design in order to,
Renderings.
The renderings.
and renderings, in order to kind of downplay any detrimental impact or to,
Right.
yeah. And so what we'd like to, I think one thing that's always been a concern for me is that if we require that any representation made has to be from a certain anchor point, a height and distance, or something that would make sure that the perspective we are seeing is a accurate representation, as opposed to looking at something as if you were standing on a crane 20 feet off the ground.
David, everything's different, you know?
You let, I would let them do it, and if you don't like it, say, hey, listen, we want to see it from here.
We'd have, make a request of the application.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
say that, you know, this rendering from, 14 feet in the air down doesn't really help us. We'd like to see something
Well,
sidewalk
the
across
problem-
the street, and you'll get it.
Right.
Well,
this
and-
is the
and If we
problem.
could just take a step back, so just the nexus of this is,
Yeah.
our current application form does not include pages 3 and 4. So none of this information is provided to applicants at this time. So the intent of this first exercise that the Application and Procedures Subcommittee did was to incorporate all this information into the application form, to provide applicants with the clear instructions as to
Right.
what they need to provide, so that when we at staff are reviewing applications for completeness, we can demonstrate that this is what you're supposed to be providing to us.
Right.
These renderings and models and all those things. So I think allowing applicants some time to submit applications in accordance with the information that's being provided to them will probably improve our applications that we do receive. And perhaps after we evaluate some of these applications that come in under the new application format, from there we could probably go back and revisit and see if there's anything that we need to tweak or add additional requirements.
My concern is that, speaking from my opinion, I'm comfortable that my colleagues on this particular body are able to distinguish architectural plans and elevations and renderings and kind of synthesize and get a perspective of what's really being shown, and we can kind of discount distortions or question them. But my concern is that the planning board and the Board of Adjustment might not have that degree of literacy to identify that.
So it's important to distinguish this process from those processes.
Right.
This application is only specific to applications directly to this commission.
Right.
the applications made to the zoning board and planning board have an entirely separately codified set of requirements and checklist
Checklists.
items. So this one is just applicable to applications directly here to the HPC. So
And-
it's important to understand that we get applications of referral from the planning board and zoning board are submitted with this different set of requirements
Well,
from these requirements that are shown here.
Then I guess the statement I'm trying to make might go beyond the scope of just this particular project we're discussing here, but I want to make it clear that we need to codify for all bodies certain requirements that eliminate the likelihood, the possibility, or minimize any distortion, so that people will make decisions based on sound.
So, and to just further expound, because we haven't really gotten to the full summary of our discussion
Yeah.
at the subcommittee, and feel free to weigh in, Caroline and Kathleen. But the subsequent follow-up discussion that we had was to sit down as our subcommittee and review those checklists for the planning board and zoning board applications and determine if anything from the HPC checklist should be incorporated into those checklists.
Oh, that's
Right.
great.
Oh,
Right.
So,
that's
so
a
that
good
is kind of
idea.
phase 2 of this process. Sorry, we
Right.
couldn't get to that.
No, that's
to
great.
clarify.
I
So,
That's-
didn't know
so this is kind of step 1, is to
Right.
fix the application and tweak it and make sure applicants have all the information they need. And phase 2 is to review the planning board and zoning board checklist to see if anything needs to be incorporated from the HPC checklist
Yeah,
to
there should be
supplement
consistency.
those.
Do you have any comments, Mr. Rooney, or any questions?
It's so much more legible.
Okay.
Right.
That was
I mean-
that was my goal, is because
Yeah.
it's hard.
Yeah,
There's two
and thanks
things
to Mr. Connolly for his
that-
work and review.
that are hard to read. It's
Sure.
the property data, the signature. They seem like they're kind of grayed out, and those are like important.
Oh, I
They
see.
could be.
You-
as
They
far
may
as
be a
the-
different color
the
on
header
on
title.
the screen, but
Right,
the required submission materials, it's
you
should
got
be
it.
bold.
Yep.
Right,
And
okay.
then the other comment I have is, we say under facade alterations, restorations, we ask for a complete set of working drawings. What is that? Because one of the
Normally-
most important things I'm always looking for is a roof plan, and we never get a roof plan for additions for anything. So if we could spell out exactly elevations.
Is there such thing as a working drawing? There are construction drawings, there's
Well,
site
yeah,
plan
and
drawings.
they're
I
not
don't
going to be
know
in
if-
the planning stage.
I don't know if there's something called a working drawing.
Well, working, they're construction documents.
Yeah.
Excuse me?
That's
So I think we
construction
have to be a little bit
documents.
more specific.
But we wouldn't, an applicant normally wouldn't be submitting construction documents because this is
No,
in the
never.
planning
I know, I got
stage.
that.
We
I
we
know
just
that.
want both
Just
full
the
plans.
full plans.
with a roof plan, elevations, I think,
Yeah.
and details.
Yeah, be specific. I think.
Okay, so, but it's my understanding that if we change that language, that would be an ordinance change.
Correct.
Which means that we would further look at that in a
Sure.
subcommittee.
So our subcommittee can further evaluate those.
Okay, but that's a good, very
That's
good
a
point.
very
And
good
that should
point.
be reflected in the memo that,
Roof plans absolutely kill me because
right. So when we sit down for the next meeting, the subcommittee meeting, we will discuss the definition of working drawing, construction drawing, roof plan drawings, and also how this is going to be incorporated with the zoning board and the planning board. Okay.
Mr. Connolly, in other communities that you are engaged in, either as an advocate or as a consultant, are you familiar with any language as it relates to making sure that drawings and renderings, et cetera, adhere to a certain?
not off the top of my head. We did actually look at a number of different towns and communities that have similar applications, and yours, believe it or not, was in pretty good shape. It was just, it didn't read very well. So you had a lot of the language in there, which is,
But I meant in terms of, from an architect's representations, when they make their presentation, we all know that there's distortions that are purposely created.
But I think the point is, Mr. Greenbaum, that if we feel that as this committee, we can also, we can go back to the applicant and ask them for another
and I've
document.
seen it.
But the planning board and the Board of Adjustment doesn't necessarily know to do that. And so,
We're getting back to going in a circle.
we're going in a circle here, so-
They're statutory boards, they
Right.
have planners, they have, I mean, yeah, they know what they want when they have an application that comes in front of them, and they often send the applicant back to get other, more detail or something like this. So when you say they don't necessarily, it's really.
You probably already have it in some parts of your zoning code. I'd have to
Is
look.
there
Well, we have a
anything?
checklist, you know, the
But
usual.
depending on the element of the building we're talking about, they may ask for a rendering.
I mean, the site plan set has like
But-
9 or 10 different
I
pages.
mean,
that have
that's
to
where
cover-
I've seen it specific to a specific element of a building.
But isn't there a standard in terms of that when you're showing a perspective or a rendering or any kind of elevation, that we should be able to recognize, we should all be able to see it from a common reference point, from a certain height and a certain distance, so that you can kind of make a valid evaluation.
Well,
I
if you're
don't
talking
know if
about
there is a
rooftop
standard.
additions, is that what you're?
And everything, and everything. I
Well,
mean-
an elevation is an elevation. It's sort of,
Oh.
it's not necessarily what you see.
Well,
when you're
I'll
standing
give you an
there.
example.
Never see it.
There's a
Otherwise.
difference between a rendering and an elevation.
No, I understand the difference between a rendering and an elevation. One is more of a dimensional representation, and the elevation is more flat and just line drawings. But in either case.
But you could render
where-
an elevation.
Say again?
You could render an elevation.
You
so-
could, whatever, but the point is that they're physical representations, and those representations are what we have to use to make decisions.
Mr. Greenman, can I suggest that it's been already suggested that this will go to the subcommittee? We have a lot to discuss tonight concerning the ordinance, so I think your point is well-founded. It's been acknowledged, and it will go now to the subcommittee.
I just didn't feel it was understood or appreciated.
Okay. Are there any other comments about this? And do we have to vote on this to accept this as is, or?
I don't think so. This is really administrative, so, but it's just really for you, your
Great.
review and any further comments, so
Okay.
You don't have to vote.
you don't have to vote.
We don't have to vote on it. So going forward, this will be the new application that we use when any applications come into the
Correct.
planning board. And when will
Well,
this,
come into the,
The
to the
historic
HDC.
place, right.
I'm sorry, and when will this be effective as of
As soon
today?
as I can.
What?
As soon as I can get it uploaded and get everything
Okay.
reoriented, so.
So-
Just one point to Mr. Greenbaum's point. We have a consultant that's going to do sort of a preliminary review before it gets here. So at that point, could he suggest, this is not clearly illustrating what we need?
Of course
Before you
not.
get to the board, you should add additional renderings. And I think that
Yep.
that would be helpful.
Before you get to the meeting, to
But it-
the,
Meeting, right.
But again, by establishing a standard of a distance and a height, you're now getting apples to apples.
Yeah, but I think every application is a little different.
It's different.
So
Some are
We
roof-
should have some flexibility
Right.
in enabling the consultant to make recommendations as what would make it best illustrate what we're looking for.
I'll look into it.
and when we have our subcommittee meeting, you're welcome to come and make those recommendations as well.
I will.
Okay, so as long as we do that in July, after July 2nd. Okay, so,
Thank you.
this will be, moving forward, this will now go up on the website, and so you anticipate within a week?
Probably by the end of the week, I hope to have
Okay.
everything switched over, so.
Okay,
Great.
no, that's great. I think that's,
Yeah, this
it's a
is-
big improvement,
It's huge.
yeah. Okay, so our next order of business is no old business. Our next order of business is discussion of the demolition ordinance. Now, this is a lot to cover, so let me make sure that everyone has read what Graham has sent out on the internet. We also have hard copies in front of you. I think I would like to begin by saying that we also had a subcommittee meeting of the discussion of the demolition ordinance, which Jason and I and Graham were present at. And we came up with 6 points that we were concerned about, which was then forwarded to Mr. Karasik. And I think everybody got a copy of those, so maybe I should go over those. All
Are they
right.
in this package?
No, I think they were, well, actually, we should identify what we have here. We have the demolition ordinance dated May 7th, 2019, which Mr. Karasik presented to the council.
Right, it has just to bring the board up to date, I mean, what happened was it was introduced by the council, with the council expecting
a lot of comments to come, and possibly it'll have to be reintroduced. But we introduced it in order to get it moving through the system. So it was introduced, and then by council, right in the ordinance, it said the ordinance is being referred to the planning board, which is required by law, but also to the HPC and to the Board of Adjustment for comment. So the council's basically waiting for comments from the three boards before it moves forward.
And then there will be public comment at the council meeting?
Well, when there is a public hearing at second reading, the question is if the comments that you make and the planning board makes, zoning board makes, result in substantive changes, then it'll be reintroduced. And then, once it's reintroduced, then there'll be a public hearing scheduled and adoption. But if everybody said it's beautiful, then we wouldn't have to reintroduce it. But, we're getting some substantial comments, so I expect it's going to have some modifications.
And to bring everybody up to speed, this was reviewed by the planning board on June 14th. And everybody should have a copy of the memo that Janice Talley, the planner.
I don't think I had that.
Yeah, that memo was not distributed.
I didn't get that.
Oh,
It was just sent,
okay.
yeah, Ms. Talley just distributed it to the planning board members.
Oh,
Right.
okay.
Yeah, it's still in draft form. It hasn't
I
been.
mean, the purpose of this meeting is
Yeah, the
for
purpose of this meeting is to
board
solicit just
we-
comments
Right,
from the
but I'm just saying,
Talk,
so this is the
questions,
second discussion, and then it'll go to the zoning board, and the zoning board will also.
Well, it's already been sent there, the question of whether they take it up or not. But the
Okay.
point is just to answer questions, discuss comments and stuff, and then you're going to presumably embody those in a memo, which is going to get sent back to
Yeah.
the council.
Just to further clarify, I think the council will receive 3 separate memos. One report from the
Right.
planning board, one from the HPC, and one from the Board of Adjustment.
Okay.
So this report should be crafted kind of independent of the other 2 reports.
May I ask a quick question? What we're going to look at is not just substance, but also the language as well? If there's like things that aren't clear, is that something we can bring to your
If
attention?
you find, grammatical, typographical, or the wrong word used twice, you can tell me. You don't have to discuss it at the meet. You can if you want, but you can just send that in. We're really to try and discuss the substance of the thing. And, the coverage, do you think it covers the right? Does it identify the houses that are important? What about the procedure? The HPC is intimately involved in the procedure. Is it workable? Is it not workable? Things, et cetera.
Like, one of the questions I'll have is you specifically.
Well, why don't we go over what the subcommittee discussed first, and then we'll
Sure.
open it up
Yeah.
for discussion. So, as I said, the subcommittee met with Graham, and the 6 points that we noted that then went on to Mr. Karasik was professional qualifications concerning the historic HPO position, and that they should follow the Secretary of Interior standards. That was because the creation of the Historic Preservation Officer, which is on page 1.
Right, no, I got the comment. I don't have any problem. Obviously, I don't have any problem. I just don't want, we had a situation with the ADA coordinator where the credentials were established in such a way that we've been advertising for 3 years for an ADA coordinator. Because they can't meet the credential requirements. So I try to make sure that the credentials are what, a typical person who would know this, like this gentleman here, or.
So I talked to Ira about this. When we specify this, you say U.S. Secretary of Interior, it actually should be Secretary of Interior Standards for the Treatment of Historic Properties, so we should use the full title.
Yeah. But you'll
Because there
you'll
are
put that
other-
in your memo.
Yeah, there are
please.
other, I think there's, under Secretary of Interior Standards, there's
you
standards
know-
for landscapes, but we should
I was going to say,
specifically
you don't
talk
have to
about.
argue with the point
Right.
is taken.
Right.
Use the whole name.
Okay, so that language needs to be then sent to you?
Well, I just mean that when, on your point of the HP, on the qualifications for the HPO,
Right.
just make sure that whatever qualifications you want in there are something that's, we can manage easily.
Do you have that, do you have those qualifications with you?
We
Tell-
have them upstairs in the office. so
Okay.
we can provide
My
them.
qualification.
No,
for
no,
the
no, no, no,
standards.
the-
No, we have the standard.
Yeah.
The standards, I'm just saying, is that something that we should all agree on? Because this is something that the subcommittee discussed.
The point, if your point is that you want to make sure that the person's credentialed, we'll make sure in the ordinance that the person has credentials and isn't just, somebody who we just pick who happens to be working
Right.
in a code enforcement or something.
Okay, all right, so we'll make sure that you get that. The Minor Applications Committee could take on applications not requiring a for demolition permit, and that would be the expedited process that you were discussing?
Well, okay, everybody, this whole thing is triggered because somebody wants to demolish something, so a house, so that everyone's gonna need a demolition permit, but we want an initial screening.
Right.
I may be just repeating stuff, but I'm just saying, we wanted a screening to screen out, really places that clearly don't have historic significance, and that's gonna be a lot because of the bigger the group that we have. So the idea here was to take we'll call it HPO, the Historic Preservation Officer, the chair and vice chair of this group, and they constitute a decision-making trio that can, pass these, you get 10, first of all, we don't have that many demolition applications for total demolition. We had 10 last year. So we're not talking about, an enormous amount of stuff. But the idea is you look at them and you look at the place and it's, there's nothing, no historic significance, not next to, just happens to be in a study zone. And you say, fine, you send it back to the to the zoning officer and say, approved. That's the idea. Now, who does that? I mean, if you want to use your subcommittee instead of that group, those three people, I'll look into that. And I think it's probably okay, but I just want to make sure, since these people are actually making decisions.
Well, what do the other people, Mr. Rooney, what do you think about that?
Well, years ago when we had the 75-year law, two of us would go out from the board, and we weren't necessarily committee members, but we were just assigned to go look at these properties. And usually what it was a tumbled-down garage. It's not worth saving. Occasionally you ran into an amazing garage. She'd say, oh yeah, you want to save that.
Right.
But other than that, it was, a 20-minute operation.
So it worked the way that you're describing, and it didn't necessarily have to be the chair and the vice chair?
Did not. We
Okay.
just assigned people to do it.
And that would be but that would be a subcommittee, or was it just
It
anybody?
was random. We didn't have
Let me tell you what happened at the
subcommittees.
council. This was written that the chair of this commission and the Historic Preservation Officer comprised the decision makers. And the mayor wasn't happy with that. He thought there should be at least 3 people making that decision.
Okay.
So he said, how about the vice chair? Now, it doesn't have to be those 3 people, but I think he wanted to make sure that there was enough, separate eyes on the thing. So I wouldn't go to 2 people, at least,
Yeah.
that was clear. So I added the vice chair in there. They were happy with that. But the important thing is that these are people who have some positions, something selected, so that, their decision can be supported if we ever have to get into a fight about it. So we can talk about, let me think about other options. What would you like, though? Would you like?
Maybe have a demolition subcommittee, and whenever that application comes up, that they can review it.
They'll have to be around and have to be ready to address these things. The point is, the whole idea of this was to I'm not saying they're not, I'm saying, the whole idea is somebody files a demolition permit, the construction code has 20 days to issue that permit unless we stop it. So, things have to happen quickly, at least the screening out process. And that was the point the planning board made. They want this screening out process to happen as smoothly and as quickly as possible with with as little burden as possible on the applicant.
Well, I think that with Graham in the office, we've had great communication and are able to get together, basically within the next day often.
So if I could just suggest, perhaps the proposed edit from the HPC is that it should be the chair and vice chair or 2 other designated members of the
Yeah.
commission.
Sounds good.
Yeah,
that sounds good.
Sensible.
That's fine.
Yeah,
I'm
then we
not
could-
suggesting that you can't get it in time. I just wanted to make sure that those points were out there.
Well, that gives you the flexibility if somebody's not available,
Yeah.
that you
Right.
now can call upon a second party.
Plus the newly hired.
Plus the HPO.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it would be
Okay.
the HPO and the chair or vice chair or 2 other
Now, what happens if 2 of the people agree and 1 doesn't?
comes here.
It comes to the commission.
Well, we have to, I think it goes to the full board. I mean, that was the idea, but I'll take,
You probably want to mention that, because that doesn't.
no, I
that's from
think
the
we
president.
did mention it.
It's in-
Really? Okay.
Yeah, it's at the bottom of page 11. 347, 142.1.5K. The last sentence, it goes on to page 12. If one or more of these persons do not agree, review of the application will proceed as prescribed in this article, meaning that it would then go
Means
through the
full
full
review.
application process and come here to the commission.
Yeah, I
Which
mean,
would-
we're
and it would be
really-
voted on.
We're really looking for a reasonable approach, We definitely don't want to have houses demolished that are part of the fabric of the community, blah, blah, blah. On the other hand, we don't want to stop people from being able to build a new house if there's really if there's no significance.
And if an application comes in that's of a significant building, demolish a significant building, and it doesn't jive with our meeting schedule, then we would have a necessity hold a special meeting to discuss this.
I think we're going to try to see how we can, the timing is an issue that everybody's
Right.
aware of. And the 45 days isn't made up. It comes out of the statute. So, yes, I mean, it might result in a special meeting. Again, these things are not very frequent.
Mm-hmm.
So, hopefully it won't. But a special meeting can also be 4 people. It has to be. So
Right.
yes, that's a possibility. It's part of the accepting this responsibility.
And in order to meet that timeline, it's incumbent upon the planning department to bring the application to the attention of whichever body, this
Yeah.
expediting body, but
Right.
immediately, so that there's no lag.
Well, the initial application, that's the whole point. It's going to be relatively short. I mean, it's going to be, we have to figure out, they want the least burden possible versus you guys wanting enough information to be able to see if there's historic significance. I mean, the house may look like a suburban split level, but Yogi Berra lived in it. So it may have a different type of significance than architectural. And you know this, I mean, I'm just repeating what you already know. So we have to have enough initial information at least to be able to catch. If it's architectural, you look at it, It's easy. But there are other historical things
Yeah.
that are
Yes.
a little more subtle.
Right. Does anyone else have any other thoughts on that point, number 2? Or the point I made, you don't have it written down.
About the expedited process?
Right.
Yeah, the additional language about the 2 other commissioners.
Right.
Right,
So what's that?
that's good.
Okay, the next thing we discussed was the term total demolition, and that was something I know that you were wrestling with, and that we felt that needed to be more fully defined.
Okay, well, the reason I was wrestling with it was the point of this ordinance is not to generally cover, pieces of houses or, being demolished, or perhaps a wing. We're trying to, the evil that's trying to be addressed is what we saw up on the mountainside, and where somebody comes along and just pulls down a whole house. If it's a more partial thing, this ordinance isn't aimed at addressing it. It's really addressing total demolition of a building. It could be a garage, it could be a carriage house, it could be a house, it could be an outhouse if there was a historic outhouse. But it's a distinct building. And yes, I'm not disagreeing with you, by the way. So we have to really come up with something that reflects pretty much of a total demolition. I'm not sure how that is, and you guys can make suggestions about it. I mean, Janice was talking about, well, 50% of the building is enough. We do have situations where people are taking stuff down, leaving 2 walls. Stuff, people leave the foundation. Well, obviously, if it's just the foundation, that's a total demolition. If it's 2 walls, it should be a total demolition, et cetera. And then where does it go? It's kind of like, God and Abraham talking about Sodom. How many righteous people are in there? You know my reference? Yeah.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Right.
Yeah. What?
I said, thank you, Rabbi.
Well, what about just altering the building beyond recognition?
Right.
Right.
Which one? I'm
talked
sorry.
about
Altering the
Altering-
building beyond recognition.
moving details.
Yeah, if you took a clapboard or shingle house, took off all of the facade, all the shingles, all the clapboards, got new, and this is
Clad it with
extreme
stone.
example, Garden State brick
Right,
face
right.
comes in. Obviously, I think we want to catch that. I think we could say, maybe besides demolition, to remove all or substantially all the historic elements.
But the historic
Yeah.
elements have to be
They have
defined.
to be defined.
Well, yeah, that's why we have a historic preservation committee.
But wouldn't they come here anyway, though? Right, if they were altering their building?
No, not
Well,
if it's
if
not
If it's going
designated.
to the
Yeah,
zoning.
it's important to discern that we have a review process set forth in 347-136 for local landmark properties. So we have dwellings in town and our commercial districts that are local landmarks, and changes in siding, exterior material finishes, doors, windows, lighting, all those things. If anybody proposes to do those at those properties, they're filing that application that we looked at earlier, an application for certificate of appropriateness to make those modifications. This demolition ordinance, as defined under the historic structures section, is applicable to all nearly 5,000 additional properties that were identified in the 2016 master plan element. So it's important to kind of splice those things out, and that's why the local landmark process is important, because that's a collaborative initiative where we write a nomination report, we have to mail notices to the property owners, they're going to be designated, it goes through a public hearing process, and owners are aware that they're now within this district, so they're aware that modifications made to their properties are subject to review by this body. This ordinance was initially crafted just to address total demolition and loss of structure. So that's where it's important for the commission to kind of split those two things out and understand that what we're doing here is trying to stop the total demolition of those structures. But if we want to, review modifications to those properties and maintain their historic appearance, that's where the landmarking process needs to happen, and that's what we're undertaking this year with the 2 new districts that we're working on. So it's important to kind of separate out those two facets.
Yeah, that's
so,
a better, the more you add stuff or place stuff, the less likely this thing will get adopted. Essentially, we're trying to, we're aiming at this particular.
But I think the initial question was, what constitutes total demolition?
And
is
my
that the right-
initial thought was what you think it constitutes, the whole building being torn down, be it a garage or a house. And then we do have to, obviously, you can't say until nothing is left. It's like Carthage or something, because there are some 2 wall kind of things and everything, but we really can't get into those weeds too much. we really have to be talking about something which is
Well,
essentially,
What scares me is that where people will try to skirt the demolition clause by asking for a non-full demolition permit, and then in the course of their project, oh, the backhoe happened to hit this, and now all of a sudden it's no longer habitable, and then you have the fire department say, this is no longer habitable, it has to be demolished, it's no longer,
well,
But-
even more accident of backhoe. I mean, you have people, they do part of it, then they do another part of it, and another part of it. I mean, there are ways we'll have to deal with ways of circumvention.
right, the perversion of the law.
But we can deal with that.
Yeah, that's a violation, right? Isn't
Yeah.
that where
It's a
you send out the violation?
And you get a stop work for it.
Right, right.
Anyway,
I-
I understand the question, but
Well, no, but I'm more concerned with altering, as Caroline said, altering a building beyond recognition, which the historic context is gone.
yeah, and that's, I guess what Graham's answer was there was those buildings that have so much, that their facades and their look are really important should probably go through the landmark process, or at least, or be in historic districts. Because let's take the houses that were demolished up on Lloyd Road
Right.
as an example. And because there are lawyers on me all the time about this, they were demolished legally, they took out permits correctly, it wasn't done in the middle of the night, et cetera. Having said that for the record. Those houses, if I remember looking at the pictures, were, the big old frame houses that are part of that area of Montclair and that give Montclair character, et cetera, et cetera. I don't remember if there was any particular historic element on, that you could identify on the facade or on the house. I'm not sure, because I looked at a picture of it.
Well, actually, one of the houses was completely different from its original design.
Right, on the
Yeah, because it
exterior.
had been totally modified.
But one
was
had
pure.
significance because of the people that, of the time period where it was built, and also of the people that lived in it. There were some inventors or something, I don't remember quite.
Right, no,
but-
I kind of, so it's going to be, my point is just that it's
Ira,
it's
can-
hard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know it's hard. Well, we'll finish what you were saying, and then
No,
I have an
I
idea.
think I made the point. The point is that you take houses like that, if somebody was going to change the facade, should we stop them from changing the facade when the facade itself doesn't have, some historic elements?
But you
That
could
really-
argue,
I didn't mean for that to be part of this.
right,
when I
but you
wrote
could argue that one, follows your point, and the other one would be something that was significant.
You could. But again, we're trying to, basically, we tried to do, I tried to in the ordinance is have as broad a group of houses that could be subject to it, but as small, but the activity that triggered it to be as narrow as possible to accomplish the goal. Narrow activity, broad scope, essentially.
Right. Can I just talk a little bit about New York City procedure and law?
Sure.
We have something in place called a notice of review, which is when a building is identified for designation, it's had a hearing, or it's in the process of being designated. There's a delay of 40 days before the buildings department will approve something, so that the Landmarks Commission is alerted, and the applicant would work with staff to negotiate something. Maybe the applicant is ignorant of, the importance of the house, and maybe they could be educated in those 40 days. And if we fail to persuade them to make changes, ultimately, they can just go ahead and do the work.
That's kind of the ordinance we have, but let me just ask you, are you talking about scenarios where, for instance, it's a brownstone that the facade is being, or are you talking that the facade is being changed, or are you talking about the demolition of that brownstone?
No, a notice of review is, it could be any kind of alteration
Okay.
that requires a buildings department permit, and it's referred to the Landmarks Commission for some,
Well, that's
it's not in
kind of
the
how this is
district?
started.
it's in a area of study. It's been heard but not
Why?
designated.
Would that translate to our potential?
Yeah, yes.
Yes.
That,
Okay.
that would be the idea,
That
our
be a-
potential historic district.
That's a different, I think, a different ordinance. I mean, a different, in other words, to create a process by which, you know, anything that somebody wants, which right now, if somebody wants to do what you're suggesting, and they need to go to the planning or zoning board, then it might get referred to you, and you can give your opinion, but it's only advice. If it wasn't a designated place, and it wasn't in a historic district, then there would be no review at all at the current, in the current situation, and a permit would issue for either demolition, or for alteration, or whatever. If the house happened to be, you know, getting undesignated and not in one of these areas. In fact, not in a local designated area or a local designated house, because these big areas that we're talking about, there's no ordinance in place right at the moment.
Right.
It's covering those.
Just to clarify, we do, so as part of our designation procedures for designation of landmark structures, object sites and districts as historic, it's 347, 135B2. We do have a notice requirement. It's 20 days. It's that advisory that your property has been subject to a designation review period. So it's 20 days prior by certified mail. We're required to provide a notice. So we have
But
that
I
codified.
was just thinking of, in applying it to some of these surveyed areas, that if someone in the building department sees something that's not a total demolition, but it's a pretty substantial change, saying, hold on a second, talk to the landmark, the HPC first, see whether you can work something out to everybody's mutual agreement, and.
That'd be good, but it's not this ordinance.
Okay,
Yeah.
it can't be stuck in here somewhere.
Again,
So what number is that, Graham? 130?
347, 135B2.
B2?
B2A.
I'm really concerned about the
With notice to the
narrowness, you
owner.
know, and not solving all the
Right.
That's a
historic
part-
problems,
that's-
because
that's
it
once
won't
a-
happen, and then we get nothing.
Just to clarify, Chair Bennett, that's once the nomination report has been scheduled for, the nomination report has been completed.
Yeah, yeah.
All right.
So
Eh,
I have a question. Where, when you said in your question from your subcommittee about total demolition, and the question as to what defines it, where was it in the document with that?
It's on page 5.
It's right up there, it's defined, and
Page 5.
I even told
Item
people,
B at
hey,
the
we
top.
gotta address this. Well, why don't we do this? Why don't, as you guys talk about it, and also in whatever memo you do, make some suggestions about the definition, but realize, at least where I'm coming from, and where I think the council will be coming from, that they're looking for total demolition and not the broad range of alteration stuff. That-
Well, how about something that just defines demolition as a level of substantial modification such that it's, the net result is an entirely new structure with a new elevation?
We'll look at we'll look at any definition that anyone comes up with, we'll look at and try to figure out if we can fit it in. I mean, I have an open mind, it's
Yeah.
just that,
Well, does anyone, Tom,
We
do you have
have
any
to-
suggestions?
I-
Or
well-
what constitutes a total demolition?
I
Well,
think,
substantially.
if I could just make a suggestion, perhaps, I think, because our existing ordinance, everything speaks to public view. I mean, so the public view of these existing historic facades is what's important. So perhaps crafting, my suggestion maybe for the commission to consider, perhaps crafting this demolition definition to somehow encapsulate the front facade, the floor
Yes.
Yeah,
facade.
if
I agree.
You know,
if the
that's
style
the primary
changes, right, if-
facade. So if you focus on that, perhaps that is one way to.
and
kind of
other
accomplish this.
ordinances do that.
You know, because
from other towns.
it's important to also consider that even in the way our current ordinances are written, if you have a landmark house, a landmark property, if you do an addition on the back of your house, you're not subject to review by this body. You're permitted to do an addition at the rear that's not visible to the street frontage or anything. So it's important to kind of consider how we manage our current landmarks and think about how we want that to play out for these potential properties and what's most important in preserving them. And so thinking about publicly visible facades or in the front
Actually, I
facing
did
facade.
write that in here under your definition on the second page, the fifth. It says demolition of less than substantially all of the building or facade or elevation visible from the street.
That's your language?
Yeah,
Where is that?
no, on the
Page
second
two.
page.
Right, he wrote it in on
V.
on your
Yeah.
copy, right?
Right.
Right.
Well, put it in the memo. I mean,
But-
I'm not trying to put you off. I'm really
Right.
we're
We
gonna
have
take
to-
these things into
I
Yeah, they have to go
think
forward to the
I
consideration.
think we need to
Right.
define what substantially means.
Right.
Meaning of a.
If it changes this, if you can't determine what style the building is
Right.
after they alter it, then, but I don't know how you.
Well, it's
define that
it's
then.
kind of like a design copyright language, where
Right.
you have to you're basically trying to create language to define something that is potentially intangible. So what you want to be able to say is, it is similar to a standard to what had been heretofore been previously.
Yeah, that's-
So you want to make sure that it retains its character in fenestration, mass void, things of that nature that are more articulated, more specific.
Still hard.
Let's
Tom,
Give
where
it
did
a
you have
whirl.
this again? Where was it?
He wrote it.
On the second page here.
Yeah, under what?
5, right in the middle of the page.
V.
Yeah. So 347-136A,
And
under the,
V?
it says 1, 2, 3, 4.
Right, demolition of less
So it
than,
says demolition of less than substantially all of the building or facade, or facades visible.
Well, so hang on one second, just to clarify for purposes of what, this is our existing C of A requirements. Ira just added that clarifying language at the end. So essentially what this is saying, 347, 136A, V, A, sub A, V5, is saying that if any demolition less than substantially all of the building has to file a C of A for landmark property. So we don't want to change that section. What we want to
No.
change is on page 5.
No, no, no.
Right.
Page 5, letter B, and letter B at the top, that is where total demolition and totally demolished are defined
Okay.
in this new ordinance.
Right.
So that's where
Or
any
destruction
proposed
of
language changes need to
substantially
happen.
all, and I think we need to.
And we're
define
creating a
it.
new permit. That total demolition permit doesn't exist right now. It's a
Right.
new permit which is fine, we can do that.
Well, Janice had
How
suggested
about-
more than 50%,
Well,
but
that's,
that's
how about
a
rendering it-
subjective too.
How about rendering the building indistinguishable from the original architect's intent?
oh, great. You're
Great.
gonna have fun trying to.
Well, it's gonna be
We've been
hard.
grappling with this administratively in the office, how folks will review that, so.
Yeah, I mean,
so to get back to B then, is this going to say from, visible from the public from the street, from the public?
Right of way?
including a facade when visible from the public right-of-way, it sounds like.
Well, not just
something like that.
including, in particular, you're
Or
trying to
facade
prioritize.
when visible. I'll put it here. I mean, I don't know what's going to end up flying, but I
Yeah.
think you have to make your points strongly.
Right.
Well, I think just one thought on that is that, because we have to kind of separate this out as we review these permits, as they come through, you know, so if somebody takes down the back wall of a house to do this big rear addition,
Right.
that would fall under this, that, the way it's written, that might fall under this category. So it's important to kind of, I think a good approach for the HPC to take would be to emphasize that front facade and
Yes.
publicly visible
Mm-hmm.
facade walls,
So-
and kind of relax on the non-publicly visible facade walls, to kind of a carrot and a stick approach.
So by
To
saying
kind of help.
substantially alter the building, specifically, in particular, the front facade,
And those facades visible.
and those facades visible to the street.
Destruction of substantially all the building, all of any building or facade when visible from the public way,
Or,
you know, which may or may not include the foundation. I don't know, I mean, we'll keep going, but I mean, I guess that's the point you want to make.
but once a building has been made indistinguishable, totally distinguishable from its original, to some extent, that is a demolition
Yeah, you know, people aren't, I mean, I understand the desire to make, just not see that happen, but it hasn't been happening. It's not been a problem.
Well, what's
Yeah.
interesting is the owner of the properties on Lloyd Road, his home that he presently occupies, to my understanding, was a mid-century contemporary home where when they renovated it to make what he has presently, they retained the full foundation and perhaps one wall with a specific intent. And I don't know what that intent was, but
Yeah, but that's, if, you know, that sounds like a demolition to me. I just mean that we're not getting scenarios, well, maybe we will, but I'm concerned about tear down, build McMansion kind of thing. I mean, that's what I'm concerned about. You guys can, I mean,
Well,
have
yeah,
a
right. I
broader
don't know if we
view.
want to get into alteration, right? That's,
Yeah,
we're talking
I
about
think it
alterations,
starts-
right?
well, that was
Because we
complete. That
have
was complete.
a
I
lot
mean,
of houses on 2 acres, 1 acre and
I'll show-
stuff, and
I'll tell you
people
the
with this kind of
location. You'll
money
see what I'm
will
talking
do
about.
that.
Right, right.
That's what we're trying to stop right now.
It's a substantially different home entirely.
Yeah.
All right, so,
I
we-
would say that was an alteration, though, right? It wasn't a demolition.
It was a demolition.
Let's
though.
go down the list
If you
of
saw it.
questions.
It
How's
was
that?
a total
Yes, I know you have.
You can.
Total
It was a
demolition.
total demolition.
the next thing that we were concerned about was redevelopment areas. They're not included in this ordinance? Is
Which?
that redevelopment areas?
Areas of redevelopment.
I'm not sure why they're, of course, they're included, they're not excluded. I mean, it's the same thing. If there's a redevelopment area per se isn't included, but if there's if a house designated, or if
Within
it's in a historic
district?
district, like, say, the Seymour Street redevelopment, isn't that in the Midtown Historic District there? So this would apply in the same way. In other words, the redevelopment area doesn't trump the fact that an area might also be in a historic district or also might be a designated historic house. What it
I
does
thought-
do is we create new zoning, but this isn't, unless the redevelopment plan specifically said, if this ordinance was in effect, unless the redevelopment plan said this ordinance doesn't apply, then it would apply.
Well, hold on.
Wait a
Here-
minute. Don't we review as a body redevelopment plans
Absolutely.
before they were implemented?
Planning board does, and you do too, yes.
Right.
So you will review those anyway, but I'm talking about, it's not just a matter of this board, you know, giving its advice that you shouldn't tear down that historic house that's in the middle of the redevelopment area. It's a matter of the fact that that historic house is subject to the same rules as anywhere else. I don't think the redevelopment area trumps what?
Yeah, I have two.
And then on page 2, it says work associated, this is a development
Yes.
area. Work associated with the development application approved by the planning board or zoning board of adjustment is exempt from this requirement.
So that's our existing language. So
Right.
That's already in the ordinance. So I think what's important is if you turn to page 12 on this discussion, at the bottom of page 12 is a section that Ira's added. It's letter C. Goes that way. So
Well, does
yeah,
that-
Cases where the approval of a development application by the zoning board or planning board would result in total demolition, issuance of a total demolition permit pursuant to this article shall be included as a condition in the board's resolution of approval.
What does that
So
mean?
what it basically said there is that if somebody, see, there's a lot of things somebody can do. They don't have to go to the construction office for a demolition permit. They can go to the planning board for site plan application to build a nice, beautiful house. However, when there's a historic house already there, which implicitly has to be torn down in order to build the house. So if the planning board approves this new house, or zoning board in most cases, if it's a house, that's not enough. It still has to, getting a demolition permit has to be a condition. And if this board, and if we don't get a demolition permit, well, can't do it.
So this is exactly the issue of the Lloyd Road property, where they got the approval from the planning board, so therefore, then they went to the construction officer and got a demolition.
And then if
Which
you were,
property are you talking about?
I'm talking about the two homes on Lloyd Road.
No, they didn't get approved. They went to the construction office. They applied and received demolition permits for those houses. And then, in fact, I have the permits with me. And then they were torn down. Then they prepared plans for a new house. And they went to the Board of Adjustment, I think.
they
Yeah,
never went to the board.
for
What?
a
They never
variance.
appeared at the board.
They never appeared, but they filed an application,
But,
right?
yeah, right. But to add on that, so I'm jumping around trying to answer these questions.
Yeah.
Iris also added a section on page 6, letter D at the
I
top.
forgot what I thought of it.
This is all written in here. So letter D says, a permit to totally demolish a historic structure where a development application has been filed with the planning board or board of adjustment shall not be issued during the pendency of the development application or thereafter unless approved pursuant to the requirements of this chapter. So this essentially is a holding clause that the demolition permit cannot be released until the boards have concluded their proceedings on the application.
But then to get back to page 2, where it
Mhm.
says, "Work associated with the development application approved, the planning board is exempt from this
Right,
requirement?"
so that's our existing ordinance language. So if there is, that's why when we see like 59 Glenridge Avenue, that's the building that's going to the planning board, that typically, that's in the Pine Street Historic District. If they were just doing facade modifications, that would trigger this 136A, a certificate of appropriateness. But because they have other site work going on, the planning board then assumes jurisdiction of that application, and they are the ones that take over. So that's why work associated with the development application becomes exempted from the issuance of a C of A.
If that's existing, and then what we did was pull out total demolition.
Correct.
Whatever total demolition is, it's pulled out from that whole, there's a new section, 142.1, total demolition. It's pulled out of the C of A section. That's why the C of A section got gutted. And all of the criteria for demolition were taken out of the certificate of appropriateness section and put into this total demolition section. So that essentially, I didn't want separate standards for demolition in a scenario where a certificate of appropriateness was needed than for demolition in a place where certificate of appropriate wasn't needed. Wanted to have the same standards for total demolition in all cases, so it was pulled out of that area and put into this one new total demolition section. So the old section still, if somebody is either, if somebody's applying for work to the planning or zoning board, as it is now, and as it is in most towns and everything, those boards have jurisdiction, period. The way they have jurisdiction is one-stop shopping kind of thing.
Well,
You can't interfere with their jurisdiction other than being advisory. The way we got around that on the total demolition is creating a new permit and using section 111 of the land use law, which allows you to deny or grant permits in situations where the planning or zoning board approval doesn't, how's it worded? It doesn't address this area. And since we start by saying that, hey, the planning and zoning board only deal with what's being built, they don't deal with what's being torn down,
Right.
we can separate the two. And that gives you the power, this commission, to issue a permit. And that's where the power comes from.
right, that's smart. I think
That's
what you did was a way to dance through the land laws.
Well, if we contradicted the land use law, and we didn't have a place we could point to get authority.
A
for
final
the land use
authority.
law, then this whole thing would be a waste of time.
Right, so
So-
that ultimately, the HPC has the final authority on the demolition.
Based on section 111
Okay,
of the land use law. So
I
there
guess I was
that was
actually,
the key piece, because without the power and the authority to do this, it would just be ignored and in court it would lose. But because you have that authority to grant or deny a permit based upon historic considerations. We have to separate it out from what the planning and zoning board does, because once they have it, and if it's part of what they have, then you can't interfere with it. Just like you have the issue you have now, when there's a site plan application, it comes here for advice only, which is frustrating, I know.
Quite frustrating.
But we're trying to, this is,
Interject this in between.
so that was how it's, so I got the point, but it was really sort of, the needle was thread on that one.
Will that hold water? I mean, that,
Hasn't been done before,
uh-huh.
but the statutory, I mean, it seems to be a clear interpretation. It seems to be a very reasonable interpretation of the statute. And we do have a rational basis for the regulation of these total demolitions, because we can establish their importance to the character and fabric, et cetera, of the town. Anyway, that's how it was designed, so there's,
So the demolition of a historic structure is a tear in that fabric that qualitatively
Yeah.
changes the ambiance and
you
environment.
like that stuff? I wrote a lot of stuff out.
I saw that.
But it's important, because it gives the basis for exercising this authority.
Right,
Without it,
I caught that.
it's ultra vires.
It's ultra vires?
Ultra vires. Outside the authority, outside the power. Ultra vires means outside the power.
Okay.
Vir is a Latin word for power.
Got it.
Ultra vires is a legal term for when somebody does something outside their authority to do it.
Does anyone else have any
Popular thing in Washington.
Yes.
comments?
Well, you had more on your list, didn't you?
Yeah,
Yes, I'm
let's
just
go to the next
want to
one.
make sure that we, demolition by neglect. So, and speaking to Graham, he said this is a compliance issue, and the building department would have the ultimate control. But is there anything that we can put in this? I mean, we're facing, I think now we're going to have a major issue with the Bellevue Theater, which seems to be empty.
Well,
Neglect is going,
I did think it's a code enforcement issue because, first of all, we have a very, very robust enforcement on abandoned properties, vacant properties. In fact, we've been extremely successful in getting compliance, also getting registrations and fines for residential, not for commercial. Commercial is different, but for residential houses we have. I don't think anyone can get close. If a building right now is sound, I don't think they can get close to demolition without code enforcement being all over them. But I didn't see a place for it in here. I do have this nice article with the National Trust for Historic Preservation, which you probably sent me, right? And I read it and I thought it was excellent, but I think code enforcement is our route on this. That's my opinion.
I think, Tom, didn't you send me something from Milburn? Milburn has something.
Yeah, I don't remember, but.
I don't
did
have
read
it.
I've
You
never-
said that, and
No,
I pulled it out.
Chair Bennett, you did send the Milburn language, and it's exactly the same as what's in our ordinance section.
Oh, okay.
Currently.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was-
that came from Trenton.
Mhm. Yeah, it was directed by
But
the state.
bottom line is, if, like, the example of the Bellevue Theater, it's sitting there unoccupied, potentially unheated, therefore pipes could burst, something could happen.
They already
Yeah,
have.
the Bellevue Theater, I mean, I can only tell you that the owner and others are working really hard right at the moment to try to come to an agreement to move that get that theater at least back open again. But, of course, there's no way to know whether or not that'll happen. But
But you just said that the
it hasn't been vacant that long compared to some. Yeah.
the compliance issue for residential is very robust, but not for commercial. Why is that?
Well, commercial, I shouldn't say, I meant the abandoned property law is very robust for residential. For commercial, we don't have a vacant and abandoned regulation, but we do have very strong code compliance for fire and for facade, you know, and
Inspection.
grounds. I mean, it's just, I'm just trying to think.
Well, we have an example on Glenridge Avenue.
Yeah.
The little white church.
Yeah, that church is, again, that sort of has a whole history to it. It is in pretty rough shape.
But
I don't know what the owner wants to do with
Yeah,
it.
that's an example of demolition by neglect.
Yeah, absolutely, since I've been looking at it.
Yeah, but the neglect was 20, 30 years ago.
But it's been, I was actually inside about 6 years ago,
Me too.
and it wasn't that,
It's a nice building.
I was
It's
underneath because
salvageable.
there was a sinkhole there, a gigantic sinkhole
Right.
behind it that opened up. You could put a truck in it.
But that's an
anyway,
example.
Listen, I got the example. I
Right.
just, I can't really discuss the
right.
stuff about it.
What we're just trying to understand is how does our ordinance here address basically demolition via neglect? Intentional demolition by letting a building just
Our
deteriorate.
ordinance here doesn't. As
But
it is,
this-
the new
So,
past-
so I think,
What?
again, we're making comments to the council
Right.
on this, so I think adding a whole section on this might be helpful in your memo, advisory memo to the council, that demolition by neglect is a serious concern.
I mean, it's hard
And
for
that
me
should be
to
addressed
wrap my head around
ordinance, but-
demolition by neglect because I've never come across a building I couldn't restore. There's always a way to do it.
You go look at that church.
But-
Yeah, that church, I think, is.
No, I know the building.
You can do it.
Yeah, but I mean,
It's always possible. It's, you know.
But they'll argue
it's
it's not safe
it's a
and
financial
sound
thing.
and structurally sound, so therefore,
But you could always upgrade it.
But,
There's always a way.
Ira, what was the language that you mentioned before about it's a tear in the, you just
oh
read
yeah.
it.
I thought
mean,
that was
that's-
actually very
They're in the
interesting language. I think that was
Well,
essential
that's,
language.
that could be, couldn't that be applied to what's essentially an abandoned building, such as Glenridge
Well,
Avenue?
listen, commercial buildings are also historic. And commercial
Right.
buildings, if they're designated, will be subject to all of this.
This is the whole
including
raison d'etre
demolition.
for the ordinance, that language. You're basically
Right.
giving the substantial basis for why this ordinance exists, right? Because the demolition of a historic structure is a tear in the fabric that qualitatively changed the ambiance and environment. The obvious presumption is it's detrimental.
Right, let's say somebody wanted to demolish the Crane building and build the hotel like it's being built further up. I mean, that would be a major historic blow to the town.
You're talking about the Crane Museum building?
No, the Crane, oh, no, sorry, the Crane building is at the
Crane-
corner of Bloomfield Avenue and South Fullerton.
Oh.
It's a building that had used to have a clock on the top, and it was built by Seymour Crane.
The red brick
It's-
one?
It's at the corner.
Right.
Oh, that's a beautiful building.
Yeah, exactly. I just used as an
Well,
example.
it's also like Lackawanna, that's a good example.
Right, well, I used the Crane building. I'm not going to go back to a corner like that.
But you might as well, it's just-
No, I might as well
No.
not. But my point is.
Our point is that there could be something within this ordinance that you could conceivably write using the same language?
Well, the ordinance, the stuff you're I can't remember if it was Princeton or maybe it was Milburn, there was an affirmative obligation for the owner of a historic property, designated historic property, to maintain it and keep
Well-
it up. And there are ordinances, and I know I've seen them, if I don't have them, probably have them in this book, that say that. And if you want that,
Well, only because
that's
we're
another
looking at-
ordinance.
That's
That's
another
not
ordinance.
this.
We have it codified. It's here. Preventative
did it already?
maintenance, yes, it's in here.
Well, you
The whole
see that?
section. It's exactly
We
word for
already
word
got
the
it.
Milburn text.
So,
Us and Milburn have
so the
exactly
question
the
is
same.
about enforcement.
Right.
And
So it doesn't have anything to do with this.
No.
So are you saying that that addresses the issue of demolition by neglect?
Yes.
so are there fines that are being served?
Notice
in-
of violation is, I can read it to you. So notice in the event that any landmark or any building, structure, site, or object located within a landmark district deteriorates to the point that, in the best estimate of the administrative officer, this sounds like where the issue is, the cost of correcting the outstanding code violations equals more than 25% of the cost of replacing the entire building, structure, object, or site on which the violation occurs, the administrative officer shall serve personally or by certified mail return receipt requested, a notice on the property owner and property listing the violations. the estimate for their abatement and the replacement cost of the improvements, and stating that if the owner does not make all necessary remedial action within 60 days, or such extensions as the administrative officer shall grant for good cause, the township's designated official may, at the expiration of said 60 days, enter upon the property and abate such violations and cause the cost thereof to become a lien on the property.
So
we
what's
can fix
going
it
on with the
ourselves
church on Glenridge Avenue then?
Excuse me?
Does the church on Glenridge Avenue have
I
liens
don't,
on
I
it?
don't know, actually. I shouldn't. I
Yeah,
don't
well,
know what's
someone-
going on with that.
Well, that property is not in a local landmark district,
Oh.
But the Bellevue Theater is.
but the Bellevue Theater is.
Wait, the
I can
Glenridge
also tell
property
you that
now?
It's
enforcement,
not.
code enforcement on these
Really?
buildings has been extremely aggressive, and we have gotten a lot of compliance and a lot of fines also. I mean, significant. So it's not just, oh, it's code enforcement, forget it. Code enforcement's been extremely aggressive and successful. So that's where this issue is left. I don't think it belongs, the thought belongs in this, with this ordinance, but the code doesn't, the language doesn't go in here, I think.
So is there a way to beef up that language then for what you just, Graham just read? Not
I'm sure-
really.
Well, I'm sure there's a way to change it. I don't know that we want to.
Well, maybe not at this point.
We should look at, if you should look at it, and if you think that it's not adequate to protect historic buildings, make some suggestions. I mean, it's certainly subject to review.
Right, okay.
I haven't thought about it, so I don't have any ideas right at the top of my head.
And then another one that we discussed was the notice of demolition should be included. And did you put an issue in? And
Didn't
who
we have a
gets?
notice in there to notify neighbors and stuff? You mean notice of demolition
Right,
to
notice properties that
neighbors,
they fall within this regulation.
For some reason I thought,
Implementation of the ordinance should be delayed until notice to all current property owners affected has been given and flags are put on the tax assessor's records, or be vulnerable to
oh yeah, well,
litigation.
that point is that, and the council's very concerned about this, as was the planning board, that since we're not designated and since we're not creating a historic district, which all has this public process and everything, since we're just passing an ordinance that all of a sudden my house is on it,
Right,
and before it wasn't, they want to make sure that everybody knows that and that buyers know that. So the question is how we're going to do that. The buyer's part, we have, a list in the planning office, list in the clerk's office that actually lists blocks and lot, an address of every property. And
Within the new
then
district.
somebody suggested, I don't know if it was you, David, or somebody, that it also be put on the property record cards in the assessor's office. And what I just wrote it that way because I'm not sure what the assessor can put on and not put on, but assuming that the assessor can put on that information, then we'll put it on. I mean, that was the idea, and, it's,
When someone does like a title search or something else, will it show
it'll
up?
come up.
Should come up.
That's the point, we're trying to make it so it comes up. I mean, basically remember, this whole thing only happens when somebody wants to demolish it. If somebody wants to
Right.
buy a house and live in it, then all this is irrelevant. It's only relevant to somebody who wants to buy the property and demolish it. So virtually most owners in town who want to sell their houses, this is not going to have any impact at all, since very few buyers are going to tear down $4.5 billion, $3.5 million houses. But, we're trying
But
to
it
catch.
happens.
When it happens,
It will happen, yeah. Anyway, so that's that point.
Was there anything else in the list that the subcommittee put together?
yeah, and then the other thing was that let me just read this. And it's the concern that the planning, this is for me, watching what happened with the planning board, that they concern that some of the properties are not historic. And you addressed that before in the beginning. They're not historic.
Yeah, we would like, if we could find a more principled way. See, the reason why these various groups from the historic preservation element of master plan are included is because we need to have some kind of official designation in order to create this list. We can't just walk around and say, well, it's this one, this one, this one, this one. So the list has to come from somewhere. And that was the only place it could come. And some people at the planning board were suggesting, well, why don't you get rid of the historic study areas or something like
Right.
this? And I mean, the answer to that was, well, I don't know. I'm going to go look at them and see what's in them. But I assume they're historic study areas because there's some properties in them that we don't want to see demolished. So the question is, how do we, create a principled list? And maybe we start with this big list that we have, the historic preservation element, and maybe area by area do a more thorough survey. I don't know. I'm just speculating.
But who would be responsible for that? The historic preservation officer and 2 members of the HPC?
Have to get a nice grant to do it. No,
Yeah.
so my
Well,
that's
serious,
what we're
no.
doing with-
No, I don't think it
That's
can
what
be
we're
done
doing.
informally. It would have to, I'm just saying that if you want to cut down and throw out houses, right now the process of sort of throwing houses out of this review process is done at that initial stage by this
Are the
committee
three
or
parties?
whatever that we put together. And the idea is for them, remember, there aren't that many demolitions. If they have to review 20 in a year, look at them and say, well, this and this we want to save, these others.
I
we'd
think it
to be able
seems
to-
like a good approach, the way you've selected it.
Excuse me?
I think it seems like a very good approach, the way you've selected it,
Well, it was the only way that seemed principled.
as opposed to the 75-year rule.
Yeah, the 75 years didn't make sense. But this seems principled, and if it works the way we want it to work, people whose houses have no historic significance should just, blow through this
Right.
with very little effort.
Right.
And there are lots of them in the districts that are included in the historic preservation element because they're just very broad.
Well, what happens when you have hypothetically a district that's like an infill area from like the 1950s or 60s, like where, Steve,
Yeah, Victoria Terrace.
Victoria Terrace.
This
So
commission,
that's going to be really
I
a
know where
touchy
you're going.
one.
I mean, this commission is here to sort of make determinations about what's historic and what's not. A split-level suburb, a split-level house built by Levitt can be historic,
Sure.
depending on the context you're putting it in. I
Right.
don't have to tell you guys this, but, I mean, you're right. I mean, in Victoria, an infill house situation like that could be considered historic. Even if, like, there's some in Hoboken, there's a street like that has, I forgot what it's called now. I shouldn't, like a terrace thing with
Oh,
these
Court
tiny
Street.
little houses. What?
Court Street?
The
Not
Muse.
Court Street, it's, anyway,
But the
I
idea
have a
is that
picture in my head.
it's outside the traditional vernacular of the rest of the
Yeah,
town.
well, they were junky little
Later.
houses, but now they have a real character to them. This whole row.
Oh, right. Yeah, it's on the west, yeah.
So historic character comes in, in lots of different ways, and that's why the commission's here, I think, to try to make those decisions. I mean, I'm trying to think, there's almost nothing that doesn't have some reference back that could be interesting.
So that would be part of how I'm thinking about crafting the memo that,
Well, I think that your point back to the council would just be to maintain the designation of historic structures as defined currently in this version of the ordinance. Because that's encompassing of all of those properties identified in the master plan element. So that's, Victoria Terrace is one of our identified potential resource areas.
Does not include my house.
No, the subdivision.
I think I got missed
So-
too by a block.
Yeah, so I think stressing to the council that you want to maintain the the universe of structures as defined in the current version of the ordinance.
Yes.
And then the other thing that, on page 2, on 1A, you have a landmark of any building, structure, site, or object located within a designated local, state, or national landmark district. And when you go down to B, you only say located within a landmark district. Then shouldn't that be expanded to a landmark district to identify
Okay, let me look.
local, state, or national landmark?
Well, first of all, I think
think
that there's an issue with let's just
first
go
one.
through that. Certificate of appropriateness issued by commission required for permit issued for any work can commence involving any landmark or any building, structure, site, or object located with a designated local, state. Already, we're expanding. That expands the certificate of appropriateness, because right now, it's only designated local district,
Right.
not national or state. Planning seems to have a problem with that.
I don't know if it's a problem, but it's just, it's
Well, I
adding
think
a
that's-
lot of homeowners that don't know.
Then,
Right.
That don't know it,
Which would
right.
have to be notified. That's,
Yes.
My
then
question.
going,
Significant
then
number.
going
It's on the order of
down,
600.
right.
total demolition of any landmark or any building, structure, site, or object located within a landmark district, including total,
B is just saying that, so
I see
item
your
5
point.
and item B are just separating out partial.
Right, but what you,
Partial demolition stays with the C of A process, total demolition moves out and is
but what
subject to this
Kathleen's
full-
saying is the language should be
Essentially-
consistent.
Yeah, if we maintain the existing ordinance language, you would remove state or national from section A. That's how we have it currently codified. in the
I see your
ordinance.
point. I mean, you're talking about
But
consistency.
there's inconsistencies,
And
right?
yes, there should be, let me look at it. I think you're right. I just want to see if there was any reason why I did it that way.
Okay.
That I can't think of right now. If there isn't, then it's just a matter of consistency. And if you see anything else, like where the same words, different words are used for the same thing, because there will be a little in here, I'll look for it too, but we'll pull it out. Landmark in 1A versus 1B. Okay. I mean, those points cover an awful lot. When
So,
we talked about the procedure, we seem to have some sort of consensus on the procedure for this review occurring.
mhm.
I mean, once it does get past the initial, if something isn't thrown out by the three wise people at the beginning, then it's got to go, they've got to submit a lot of stuff.
Mhm.
And then basically, you're going to have a hearing on it. And, I mean, I think that's fine. I think, again, we're not talking about a huge number of places, but that's the only place it can go.
Mhm.
So, I don't know if you have any other comments on that procedure, but,
Does anyone else have any?
by the way, you can send anything in tomorrow, next, it doesn't, you don't have to come up with everything tonight.
Have you gone through the entire document and looked for kind of contradictions or inconsistencies that would lead people kind of get into a circular situation? Or?
The answer is yes, but that doesn't mean that, these things, this thing is the probably 12th draft, but believe me, I do this a lot, and there's a lot of things I don't, there's things I don't
Right.
see, people see, they point it out. So if you see it, or you think there's an inconsistency or anything, tell me. I'll look at it.
I mean, I have.
I did go through it, though. I mean, I tried to come up with something that has that's coherent, that makes sense, and that's functional. But if there's a loop in there somewhere, and,
Do you
or
want
an
us?
ambiguity, please.
Let me ask you a question. Are you finished with the group at the?
Yes, that's a
subcommittee?
subcommittee comments. Yep.
So, how would you suggest we proceed at this point? I mean, I have, like, notes that I've made that it can go very fast. I can run through my version, my comments and notes, but I mean, I have, like, questions. I don't want to just,
It depends on what they are. I mean,
Yeah, and
if they haven't been covered,
Send them in.
The meeting,
Okay.
we're not going to go past 9 o'clock, so. Does anyone else have any other comments that,
Just procedurally, just to advise, I was going to take the comments that we kind of walked through, that the chair discussed, put together the memo, the initial draft memo, and to send out for review by the chair and vice chair. But if there's any other
is there
comments,
anything,
should
yeah,
take
any
those
other
in.
comments, David, that were just covered by the subcommittee that we just discussed?
well, I mean, there's things that I circled where there's language that made me feel like there was some ambiguity and things of that nature, but
well, if, you know, unless, I mean, if there's something you want to ask me that's, like we've been talking about the substance of the ordinance, if there's a substantive question, I'd bring it up. If there's a question of ambiguity or stuff,
Well,
write it down and send it.
well, but I think it's,
Well, go ahead, just.
Yeah, what page are you on?
well, all right, I mean, I have many things here. First of all, you said this is for language, on page 2, where you start saying in section A, a certificate of hereinafter CA issued by the commission. It's not clear which commission.
That's
that's-
already, that's in the ordinance now.
This is just a subsection from the complete HPC chapter. He only included this because he's adding references to the new code.
That's there now.
Right,
So-
this is all existing language in that section.
Well, I was just going to say, because maybe, I don't know, what?
This is the ordinance. This is what the.
That's the
full-
existing ordinance.
That's the existing ordinance,
Well-
and what I did
Well,
was,
I was just going from the document that I was sent by Graham, but.
I understand, but you have to realize it's part, it's
This is
it's
kind of an
part of the
excerpt
existing
from.
ordinance. At
So
the
it's
beginning,
clear by virtue elsewhere that
If you
this is
read
HPC.
347, 136.
Yeah,
Okay.
right here.
you'll
This is
understand.
what,
I understand, I just wanted to make sure, the commission, it just wasn't clear.
Because it's defined at the beginning of the historic preservation.
So the next issue is on page, on page 3, on, like the fourth line down, denial is a certificate of appropriateness shall be deemed to preclude the applicant from undertaking activity applied for. I just want to understand what constitutes denial.
Well, this is already there, but basically at this board, the certificate of appropriateness is issued by this commission. If this commission denies somebody's application for one, all that means is they can't do what they wanted to do.
Okay, just want to make sure. And then, but then you did go on further, saying that there could be opportunity for conditions. Let's see.
Where?
Managing appropriate growth of the
When it says for clarification, that's retained, I left that there.
for
So that there's no
clarification. Oh, okay.
confusion.
So, all right. Page 5.
Yeah,
Total demolition and totally demolished shall mean for purposes of this section, raising, dismantling, or destruction substantially all of any building,
right.
including removal of a building from its site which may or may not include the foundation. Total demolition is to be distinguished from demolition as defined at 347-128, which is a broader category that includes total demolition.
Total demolition is included in the 128, which includes partial alterations, all kinds of stuff. It's a different definition. I
Correct,
just
and
want to make
that
sure.
definition is pertinent to the certificate of appropriateness, so like demolishing a porch or demolishing those are things that would have to come to this body.
I just wanted to make sure there wasn't any confusion, so I just said it.
Okay.
and then there, we've just discussed about adding,
Right.
Yeah,
part of the
substantially
clause
all
about the
or
facade.
any
Had a lot of
building
discussion
Yeah.
about
or
that, so-
substantially a publicly visible
Right.
facade.
I wrote some language in advance here that said substantially rendered unrecognizable from its original form. as a standard of, this is relating
Right,
to.
but we had this discussion.
Yeah, I'm going back. I wrote this before we had the discussion, so I want to make sure I got it out. This relates to page 5, section B. This article applies to all historic structures, including those that would be totally demolished in connection with a development application to the zoning board or planning board. Totally demolished. I just want to, again, we get back to that definition of totally demolished. Or how about, and again, or totally demolished or substantially rendered unrecognizable.
No, but it's essentially, what the definitions are doing is defining the term totally demolished. So totally demolished is defined pursuant to B above.
Right. I'll trust you.
Yeah, you
on
only
that.
define it once.
You only define it once.
Right.
Okay, an order condition with a construction official. An order, this is on page 6, an order issued by the fire official or construction official to totally demolish an unsafe structure is exempt from the requirements of this article.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, this is going back to Tom Connolly's point before. Well, at any given point, there's always the ability to restore historic property.
Well, they don't they don't red tag a place lightly. And if they say it has to come down because it's going to fall to hurt somebody or whatever, we can't. Their orders are preemptive.
But
We
didn't
saw
we
that
have an
last
application?
Hearing, didn't we see it last hearing?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Well, we talked to them, you know.
being demolished.
Oh,
Yeah.
it is, yeah.
I mean, if a fire official says something's dangerous and wants to demolish it, I mean, we can talk to the person, we can find out what's going on, but if it's really dangerous, they do their job, and this isn't something we can interfere with, even if it is historic. I mean, if it's, so, there's really no option on that point. The only thing we can do is, you know, create a start of discussion. People, you can talk to the construction official, the fire official. If you need to. I talked to the fire official today for a couple of hours.
The 45 days is statutory?
Yep.
Okay. I thought that was problematic just because our meetings are every 30 days.
No, it is.
We discussed that, though.
No,
That
I
if,
know.
that if there, a situation arises, we'll call a special meeting.
Okay. Certification as to whether the building or structure is associated with events that have made significant contribution to the broad patterns for our local, state, and our national history.
That stuff, I didn't change. I just
Yeah,
moved
that's
it
currently.
wholesale from one section of the ordinance to the other.
Sounds
It's-
awfully similar to a project we reviewed recently.
I don't think I touched anything there in the review criteria. There were all the review criteria already
Right.
there.
Let's see, sufficient, special historic sense.
Seemed like they were pretty comprehensive.
Notice of, cancel any objection if. All right, I guess that's it.
That wasn't so bad.
No, I wanted to make sure I,
Does Mr. Rooney or Ms. Kay Levy, do you have any other comments?
I don't.
Okay. Mr. Conley, do you have anything?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
So I'll put together a draft based on tonight's comments for you and the vice chair to review.
Okay.
And then I'll disseminate to the full
it'd be
commission.
great to have like
Okay.
almost like a flow chart. If this, then this, like if you get to this point, then you go to here, so that's,
That's easy enough. I actually made one when I was doing it, just to make sure that it worked.
right.
Oh,
So
good.
I can just prepare a flow chart.
That'd be
I
nice.
think that'd be helpful. Can you add that to the notes, or?
I'll just
Well, it
send
won't be
it
part of the
around.
ordinance. It'll just be something so you can see it.
But
Yeah,
maybe
your
the plan-
comments have to be structural to what needs to change in this
I was
document.
thinking of, it might be helpful for the planning board and the board of adjustment when they review it to have that flow
Well,
chart.
did I give you the memo I wrote to them? I don't know, probably didn't.
to whom?
I
This
wrote
one?
to the council. I have a memo which lays out the procedure. I'll send it to you.
Okay.
That, yes.
Did we get that?
Well, that might be helpful.
Oh, the planning board got it.
I think the planning board got it.
Yeah.
I think you had drafted this after our meeting in April when I
I'll
was
send
here
it
and
to you. It
reviewed.
just goes through the procedure.
Yeah, I reviewed it in detail.
It's nothing that's not in there, it's just,
You want to see
So
it?
will you make sure we got a copy?
So the next stop for this goes to whom? The zoning board?
No, it goes to the council.
It goes
Well,
to-
your memo will go
everybody's
directly to
going
the
to the
council.
council.
And when
Please
will
go
that,
directly
do you
to the
know when
council.
that will be?
Well, we have a meeting on June
24th.
25th, but this isn't
Yeah.
going to be on the agenda at all.
Well, then they've given us an extension.
They gave the planning board an extension of 10
Yeah.
10 days.
Planning board
days.
wanted a little more time.
The planning board to discuss this?
No, yeah, to write
Yes,
their.
to write their
To write the
report.
memo.
Okay.
Is there any aspect, I think we talked about this, just to be sure though, that where people would find it to be unconstitutional, that property has been
There are
designated?
people who will say that you can't tell a property owner what to do with their property. I've been
Right.
saying that since they had Euclid versus whatever it is, the initial zoning cases and urban renewal cases, Berman versus whatever. I don't remember I remember the cases, you know.
But the bottom
So-
line is this is effectively, you're trying to eliminate the risk of it being viewed as spot zoning. You're trying to create principles so that it guides us in a uniform way to adhere to a certain kind of zoning policy as it relates to historic preservation.
Something like that. I mean, do you want to have, we want to make sure the regulation has a basis and has, substantive reason for doing it. You don't like to
Objective.
regulate property just to do it.
Right. So this, to get back to when it will go to the council, will this be in August that it will
Well,
go?
you should get it to the council as soon as
As
possible.
soon as possible.
The council's not going to address this until it gets the comments from the boards,
Right.
unless they tell me otherwise. But I don't think that's the case.
Not before July, I'd say.
Not before, we have what, July 9th, and then
The second meeting is.
August, I'm going to miss the second meeting in August. I won't be there, so.
Well, I think, like, as you said
The
at the beginning of
first
the
is
meeting,
August 6th.
as I explained at the beginning of the meeting, it depends on if there's substantial changes or
Right.
not, too. So,
Oh, right.
which would require reintroduction, and
All right.
typically the public hearings are at the second council meeting of the month.
A lot of these changes, by the way, if we make changes, aren't necessarily substantial in terms of what we define substantial changes are. But I think I'll probably reintroduce it because if there's enough changes, there's no point in creating a risk that what do you even call it? That the public didn't have an opportunity to comment. So,
All right. Well, thank you for all the work that you've done on this so far.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Wait, did we ever come up with the concept of, I just want to make sure, did we ever come up with any language relating to what would constitute demolition by just rendering it completely different?
no, what we
A level
said-
of modification?
What we said was we had some ideas, and I'm going to think about it, and you're going to think about it, and we're going to see if we can, to what extent we can embody some of those ideas. And
You need language.
I mean, I think we came up with some, that, regarding visible from the street, destruction of the facade, you talk visible from the street, but,
Altering beyond recognition.
Yeah, altering beyond recognition.
yeah, so why don't you just, when you guys do the memo, you're going to review the memo,
Right.
so
And
you'll
that,
have a chance to
right.
take a shot at that.
All right, that was
language.
it. That's the language I wanted to see.
I think it's hard, that's the hardest
Right.
little piece.